I'm very pleased to introduce the first of a two-part series on one of LA County's oldest operating cemeteries. Located in East Los Angeles, Calvary Cemetery was dedicated in 1896 and sits on more than 100 acres of rolling parkland. Many of the graves here are marked with works of art carved in stone that stand more as testaments of faith than to a lifetime of accomplishments. In the heart of Calvary stands a building that seems as much out of place as it does out of time. The Great Mausoleum, designed in the Romanesque style by famed LA architect Ross Montgomery, was built between 1929 and 1936. Its scale is impressive. Soaring arches and columns topped with angels, as well as domes and a central pyramid, all draw the eye toward heaven. One can easily imagine that its inspiration came from Hollywood's early biblical spectacles, directed by Cecil B. DeMille and D.W. Griffith. And almost at once the suggestion seems appropriate, considering that so many greats from Hollywood's golden age are interred within. Come walk with me into the marbled catacombs of Calvary Cemetery's Great Mausoleum. Making our way along the forecourt, we notice that the walls on either side of us are lined with tombs. Each one is adorned with stained glass and a frescoed ceiling. As we reach the main entrance, you'll notice the quote above the door taken from the New Testament, Book of John, chapter 11, verse 25. Passing the threshold, we enter the marbled narthex, decorated with bronze medallions depicting the saints of the Catholic Church. Looking to our left, we see a corridor lined with crypts. Above us is the inner pyramid that adds an extra dimension of height. Up ahead, we cross a vaulted passage with frescoed ceilings, using designs reminiscent of those in the ancient catacombs below the city of Rome. Beyond is a stairway leading up to the sanctuary, inspired by the early California missions. The altar is adorned with a magnificent marble sculpture of the crucifixion. Masses are held here every day except Sundays and holy days of obligation. Along the aisles on either side of the nave is where you'll find both public and private family crypts. And it is here we'll pay our first visit to a man who dug a hole in the ground and found the future. When When Edward Lawrence Doheny arrived in Los Angeles in 1892, he was nearly broke. By then, he had already tried his hand at surveying, prospecting, and even house painting, and had lost a fortune in real estate speculation. However, at the time of his death in 1935, he was one of the richest men in the United States. With a $400 loan from business partner Charles Canfield, Doheny obtained a lease on property near downtown LA and began digging. The land was situated on a natural asphalt reserve and became the birthplace of the oil industry in Southern California. Over the next few years, hundreds of wells owned by Doheny and Canfield sprang up across the Southland. The timing couldn't have been more perfect, as the railroads were in the process of converting locomotives from coal to oil burners, and the coming of the automobile was right around the corner. Through his Pan American Petroleum and Transport Company, Doheny controlled vast amounts of oil-producing land in the United States, Mexico, and Central America. In 1922, Albert Fall, the U.S. Secretary of the Interior, granted him a lease on the Navy Petroleum Reserve in Elk Hills, California. It was a move that would have far-reaching consequences. With his fortune secured, Doheny turned to philanthropic work. Both he and his second wife, Carrie, were devout Catholics and donated heavily to church institutions and charities. He must have believed that he was a truly blessed man, until a bombshell struck in 1924. That year, it was alleged that in exchange for the Elk Hills lease, Doheny had arranged a $100,000 gift to Secretary Fall that was hand-delivered by Doheny's son Ned and his secretary Hugh Plunkett. Fall, Doheny, and oil tycoon Harry Sinclair were indicted in federal court on charges of corruption in what became known as the Teapot Dome scandal. With his reputation in tatters, he would spend the remainder of the decade in courtrooms fighting the charges, as well as lawsuits filed by investors. In 1930, Doheny was acquitted, but the victory brought him no joy. On February 16th of the previous year, his son and only surviving child, Ned, was killed in an apparent murder-suicide that was a result of the scandal. E.L. Doheny spent the remainder of his life in seclusion and ill health. When he passed away on September 8, 1935, he was given a lavish funeral before being interred in this private tomb just opposite the main altar. It is said that the marble was a gift of Pope Pius XI in gratitude for his years of financial support of the church. And the city, whose future he found at the bottom of an oil well, has never stopped growing. To learn more about Teapot Dome and the Doheny tragedy, see my grave exploration, The Ghosts of Greystone Mansion, The Curious Death and Burial of Ned Doheny. I have provided a link in the description below. If you ever filled up your vehicle at a gas station with the green dinosaur, then you have indirectly encountered oil magnate Harry Ford Sinclair. He was a pharmacist by trade who made his first million before turning 30 by brokering oil leases in the Midwest. By age 40, he founded Sinclair Oil and Refining Corporation that oversaw all aspects of petroleum production, from discovery to retail sales. In 1924, a Senate investigating committee discovered that Sinclair had given a $300,000 bribe to Secretary of the Interior Albert Fall. It was in exchange for drilling rights on the U.S. Navy's strategic oil reserves in Teapot Dome, Wyoming. The resulting scandal rocked Washington, and led to the conviction of Secretary Fall for conspiracy and bribery, for which he was sentenced to 1 year in prison. Sinclair was found not guilty of conspiracy, but was convicted of contempt and obstruction of justice for hiring a detective agency to follow jurors. He was sent to federal prison where he served 6 months. After his release, though disgraced, he went back to work at Sinclair Oil and moved its base of operations to Los Angeles. When he retired in 1949, his company's assets were estimated to be in excess of $1.5 billion. I came to Calvary with an idea of who I wanted to visit and where I would have to go to find them. But even with a carefully thought out plan, it's difficult not to become distracted when you're in the company of so many lives and stories. Captain George Allen Hancock's list of careers and accomplishments would fill an entire video. From oilman to scientist to aviator to concert cellist and practically everything else in between, he was a true Renaissance man. Here is the private room of Charles Henry Strubb and family. He is seen here on the right walking beside movie producer Hal Roach. They were co-founders of Santa Anita Park, which opened on Christmas Day, 1934. Henry Gage served one term as California governor and was appointed minister to Portugal by President Taft, a post he held until his wife's failing health and a revolution forced him to resign. He left politics and returned to Los Angeles to practice law. Alfred Joseph Baer was a banker and a board member of a Catholic seminary. He was also the president of a metal foundry specializing in ornamental bronze. Some of their elegant work frames the entry of his private tomb. We have arrived at another private room and will stop to pay a visit to a comedy legend.
And starring Bud Abbott and Lou Costello.
At 7 p.m. on the night of November 4th, 1943, the comedy team of Abbott and Costello made their long-anticipated return to radio. The show had been on hiatus for nearly 8 months while Lou recovered from a bout of rheumatic fever. When they came on the air that Thursday night, the team was at the height of their popularity. Audiences listening across the country heard Bud and Lou deliver laughs with the same expert timing that was their trademark. The public had no idea of the deep personal tragedy that took place only a few hours before.
Every night you're out late with girls. Last night you were out with two. Yeah, but I only caught one. There you go again, Costello.
In 1943, Bud Abbott and Lou Costello, who was born Louis Francis Cristillo, had been partners for 12 years, having come from the vaudeville stage. They were under contract to Universal Studios, where they made a string of hit movies like Buck Privates, In the Navy, Keep 'em Flying, Hold That Ghost, and many others. At the end of the show, Bud Abbott stepped to the mic alone and made the stunning announcement that Lou Costello's one-year-old son, Lou Jr., had drowned in the family swimming pool that same afternoon. By going on the air that night, Lou held to the old show business adage, "The show must go on." Lou Jr., or Butch as he was called by his family, can be found in a crypt at the rear of the chapel. Costello and his wife Ann were consumed by the loss. In an interview, he said he had no idea how he managed to be the funny man during that period. But he said as time passed, he realized there were a lot of children in the world that needed help. So with partner Bud, he established the Lou Costello Jr. Youth Foundation for underprivileged children. He said that by giving himself to those young lives in need, he found happiness again. Abbott and Costello's popularity continued into the 1950s when Universal merged the team's comedy talents with the studio's monster movie franchises. They also adapted their act for the new medium of television. The laughs continued until 1957 when Bud and Lou officially dissolved their partnership. Both comics continued to work with other partners, but never enjoyed the success of earlier days. Lou's final film appearance was in 1959's The 30-Foot Bride of Candy Rock. However, he would not live to see it released. On March 3, 1959, he suffered a fatal heart attack, 3 days short of his 53rd birthday. His wife Ann died 9 months later. Their resting places are only a few feet away from their little boy. The large body of work that the comic team of Abbott and Costello created lives on to this day, as does the Lou Costello Youth Foundation. And with their famous routine, Who's On First, they have the distinction of being the only non-athletes to be inducted into the Baseball Hall of Fame in Cooperstown, New York.
I would like to join the retired actors baseball team.
Oh, you would?
And I would like to know some of the guys' names on the team, so if I want to play with them, I know them, and I meet them on the street or in the home here, I can say hello to them.
Oh, sure. But you know they give baseball players nowadays very peculiar names.
I know, a lot of funny names.
You know, like Sticky
Nicknames.
Fields,
Sticky Fields.
Goofy Dan, Boopy Bobber. Booby Bobber.
I know all those.
Well, let's see now. We have on our team, we have who's on first, what's on second, I don't know's on third.
That's what I want to find out, the guy's names.
And then,
That's what I want to find out, the guy's name.
I'm telling you, who's on first, what's on second, I don't know's on third.
Now, Abbott, you want to be the manager of the baseball team?
Yes.
You know the guy's names?
Well, I should.
Well, then you tell me the guy's names on the baseball
I
team.
say, who's on first, what's on second, I don't know's on third.
You ain't saying nothing to me yet. Go ahead and tell me.
I'm telling him.
You ain't
Look,
said nothing yet. Go ahead and tell me.
who's on first, what's on second, I don't know is on third.
You know the guy's names on the baseball team?
Yes.
Well, go ahead. Who's on first?
Yes.
I mean the guy's name.
Who?
The guy playing first.
Who?
The guy playing first base.
Who?
The guy on first base.
Who is on first?
What are you asking me for? I don't know.
Now, wait a minute,
I'm asking you who's on first.
That's his name.
Well, go ahead and tell me.
Who?
The guy on first.
That's it. There you go again, Costello.
Be or not to be? That is the question. Whether 'tis nobler in the mind to suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, or to take arms against a sea of trouble, and by opposing end them, to die.
Just off the chapel is a room with a stained glass window of the Last Supper. If you step inside and look to your left, you will find the crypt of one of Hollywood's greatest matinee idols.
Chance to dream. Aye, there's the rub. For in that sleep of death, what dreams may come.
John Barrymore was born into one of the greatest acting dynasties of all time. In 1913, after a celebrated stage career where he made the role of Shakespeare's Hamlet his own, he entered the motion picture business. With an uncanny knack to play roles that were comic, romantic, dramatic, and fantastic, he quickly became one of the silver screen's top leading men. In addition to being hailed as the greatest actor of his time, he was almost as famous for his striking features that earned him the nickname The Great Profile. And over the years, it would be the profile that launched 1,000 myths that stemmed from the original Hollywood bad boys club known as the Bundy Drive Boys, of which Barrymore was the ringleader. A couple of the requisites for club membership was a connection to the arts, and to be able to consume copious amounts of liquor. Some of the gang were John's brother Lionel, actor Errol Flynn, writer Gene Fowler, comedian W.C. Fields, and fellow Shakespearean actor and head of another acting family, John Carradine. And it is Carradine who figures in one of the most infamous Barrymore legends. It goes that when the young actor arrived in Hollywood, Fox Studios ordered a screen test and arranged for Barrymore to direct. Barrymore instructed Carradine to come through a door and without using any words act as though he had just eaten the greatest meal of his life. After a few takes, Barrymore called cut and told Carradine to return to the studio the following day to preview the test. The next day he came to the screening room where many of the top execs of Fox Studios were waiting. The lights dimmed, the projector flared to life, and everyone present watched Carradine enter, delightedly rubbing his stomach and licking and smacking his lips. After flashing a smile, he walked out of frame, scene over. But it wasn't. A moment later, Barrymore steps through the door, grins devilishly into the camera, then casually zips up his fly. One can only imagine the reaction in the room. The footage, if it ever existed at all, is lost, but the tale is an enduring one. Despite his tremendous talents, Barrymore was plagued with demons, the worst of which was alcoholism. It would fuel the downfall of 4 marriages, his career, and ultimately his health. John Barrymore's final film appearance was in the 1941 comedy Playmates. In the movie, he plays himself giving advice to band leader Kay Kaiser on how to read Shakespeare. And for one shining moment in an otherwise forgettable film, we are given one last glimpse of his former brilliance.
In a long time. To be or not to be, that is the question. Whether 'tis nobler in the mind to suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, or to take arms against a sea of troubles, and by opposing, end them. To die, to sleep no more, and by a sleep, to say we end the heartache and the 1,000 natural shocks that flesh is heir to. 'Tis a consummation devoutly to be wished. To die, to sleep, a chance to dream. Aye, there's the rub. There's more, but I'll give you sort of an idea. Hope it didn't bore you.
Oh.
A few months after the film's release, John collapsed during rehearsals for a radio broadcast. He was taken to Hollywood Presbyterian Hospital, where he lingered in a semi-conscious state. A few days before the end, artist and fellow Bundy Drive boy John Decker made this charcoal sketch of his dying friend. The great profile passed away on May 29, 1942, at the age of 60. But as with all things Barrymore, the story doesn't quite end there. In film director Raoul Walsh's autobiography, he claimed to have borrowed John's body from the mortuary, and as a lark placed it on the couch in Errol Flynn's house. After a night of drinking toasts to his lost pal, the unsuspecting Flynn staggered home, and after discovering the corpse, ran screaming into the night. On June 2nd, John Barrymore was laid to rest here in the great Mausoleum. The inscription, "Good night, sweet prince," was Lionel's touch. To this day, adoring fans show their affection for the great profile, but many don't realize they're paying tribute at an empty crypt. In 1980, John's son had his father's body removed and cremated. His ashes are now interred at Mount Vernon Cemetery in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, the city of his birth. And for a fellow of infinite jest and most excellent fancy, a new, more appropriate epitaph was chosen. It reads, "Alas, poor Yorick." Directly above John's former crypt is his brother Lionel. He was the oldest of three siblings born to actors Maurice and Georgie Drew Barrymore. His maternal grandparents, John and Louisa Lane Drew, were also veterans of the stage. Considering his lineage, it only seems natural that Lionel would ease into a theatrical career. However, his first desire was to live in Paris and become an artist. And although it didn't pan out, painting remained a passion that he pursued his whole life. As a motion picture actor, Lionel has hundreds of credits to his name. He gave enduring performances in such classics as You Can't Take It With You, The Grand Hotel, and Dinner at 8, both of which co-starred his brother John. He won an Oscar for Best Actor in 1931's A Free Soul. He appeared alongside Bogey and Bacall in Key Largo, and appeared as Dr. Gillespie, the lovable curmudgeon, in the Dr. Kildare series.
Pardon me, sir. Don't you think we ought to rest a few days before we go on?
Rest? What do we want with rest? Nurse! Parker! Come in
But to
here.
modern audiences, he is best remembered for his portrayal as the sinister Mr. Potter, the main antagonist of George Bailey, played by Jimmy Stewart in the 1946 holiday classic, It's a Wonderful Life.
Happy New Year to you! In jail! Go on home, they're waiting for you.
By then, Lionel Barrymore was already a Christmas tradition for his annual performance as Ebenezer Scrooge in the radio dramatization of Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol.
The time for finding yourself a year older and not an hour richer. If I could work... The name on the gravestone is Ebenezer Scrooge. Ebenezer Scrooge? Oh, no, Spirit, no, hear me. I'm not the man I was. Why show me this if I'm past all hope in my own room? And the sun's shining. It's clear. It's bright. No fog. What a beautiful light. As happy as an angel. I'm as merry as a schoolboy.
Merry Christmas!
And for someone whose name was so deeply associated with the holiday season, it is a sad irony to note that it was, to him, a sorrowful reminder of a tragic personal loss. In October 1921, Lionel was cast as the male lead in the new Broadway melodrama, The Claw. His co-star was a spirited redhead named Irene Fenwick. By the end of the show's run in early 1922, they had fallen deeply in love. At the time, Lionel was married to actress Doris Rankin, with whom he had 2 daughters that sadly didn't live past infancy. Irene had already been twice married and divorced, and years earlier even had an affair with Lionel's brother John. In 1923, the lovers starred in their second Broadway production called Laugh, Clown, Laugh, and they did so as husband and wife. Lionel had divorced Doris Rankin months earlier. In 1925, they starred in 2 plays together, The Piker and a revival of Taps. From there, the couple left Broadway and moved to Hollywood. Between 1915 and 1917, Irene made only a handful of motion pictures because she found the medium too restrictive. And after moving out west, she retired from acting altogether. By 1930, she began exhibiting a noticeable loss of weight and a marked decline in her health. At the time, anorexia nervosa, from which she was suffering, was not widely known outside of the medical profession. In December 1936, as Lionel was preparing for his 3rd radio performance as Scrooge, he was called to his wife's bedside. He remained there until she quietly passed away on Christmas Eve. She was 49. The press reported her death as a pulmonary condition brought on by pneumonia. There was no mention of an eating disorder. It wouldn't be until the death of singer Karen Carpenter 46 years later that the public was finally made aware of the deadly effects of anorexia. Lionel Barrymore never remarried. He found solace in painting and remained busy in films and radio, where he continued his annual Christmas performances in A Christmas Carol. By 1940, after 2 fractured hips and the onset of arthritis, he was forced to use a wheelchair.
Next patient, please. Mr. Finch, sit down.
On November 15, 1954, at the age of 76, Lionel Barrymore was reunited with his beloved Irene. They now rest side by side forever. For our next visit, we will leave the ornamented sanctuary and make our way along featureless corridors. Here the silence is penetrating, and the marble walls amplify even the most imperceptible sound, so that it seems to the occasional passer-by that they are hearing the crypts themselves whisper the names carved into them. And it is here, in this quiet place, we find the First Lady of the American stage. The theater was not Ethel Barrymore's original career choice. She said in an interview that, "I always wanted to be a pianist, but I had to eat, and acting seemed like the natural thing to do, since the family was already in it." She made her stage debut at 15, starring with her uncle John Drew. Her early performances had a tepid reception, but critics agreed that she had something. For the next few years, she toured and took whatever part she could to sharpen her skills. By the turn of the 20th century, the potential that everyone saw had flowered, and Ethel became the toast of the New York and London stage. In 1928, the Shuberts built the Ethel Barrymore Theater on Broadway in her honor. It remains in operation under that name to this day. It wasn't only her talent that attracted the public's attention. She was also considered one of the great beauties of her time. It is told that while touring Great Britain in 1900, Ethel received and refused no fewer than 5 proposals of marriage, including one from future Prime Minister Winston Churchill. When Ethel did marry in 1909, it was to businessman Russell Griswold Colt. However, the marriage was a rocky one and ended in divorce after 14 years. She never remarried. The couple had 3 children, all of whom tried their hand at acting, but with little success. Ethel possessed an iron will and never shied away from speaking her mind. She was an open supporter of the Actors' Equity Union, whose strike in 1919 closed Broadway for weeks. And despite accolades for being more regal than royalty, she shared common interests in such things as boxing and baseball. Like her brothers Lionel and John, Ethel ventured into motion pictures. But she had an almost coquettish relationship with Hollywood that she once described as a glaring, gaudy, nightmarish set built up in the desert. In 1932, she starred with her brothers in MGM's Rasputin and the Empress. It would be another 12 years before she appeared in another motion picture. In 1944, she came back to the silver screen to play Cary Grant's ailing mother in None But the Lonely Heart. The movie opened to mixed reviews and was not a big hit, but Barrymore's performance stood out, and she won the 1945 Oscar for Best Supporting Actress.
The head on the shoulders. Love me, son. Disgraced you.
Disgrace me, Ma? No, Ma. No, disgrace me, Ma. This is your son, ain't he much? The boy who needs you, loves you, wants you.
By then, her feelings about Hollywood thawed considerably, and throughout the 40s and 50s, she appeared in over 20 movies that attracted 3 Oscar nominations. She also ventured into the brand new medium of television. In the 1952 film Deadline USA with Humphrey Bogart, Barrymore seemed to be speaking more of herself when she summed up women of her generation.
They made them different in your day.
Yeah,
More durable.
more pliable.
Will you marry me?
You're too old.
When Ethel Barrymore died on June 18, 1959, the lights on Broadway were dimmed for the last of the acting triumvirate known as the Royal Family of Show Business. Her last words were, "Is everybody happy? I want everybody to be happy. I know I'm happy." Before we move on from the Barrymores, there's one last grave to visit. At the very end of the hall from where Ethel Barrymore rests is Samuel Colt, the eldest of the 3 children she had with Russell G. Colt. Despite growing up in the shadow of his famous mother and uncles, Sam wasn't bitten by the acting bug until he was in his 40s. Beginning in 1951, he appeared in several films and television programs. However, most of the roles were uncredited. In 1957, he was cast in his mother's last film, Johnny Trouble. He retired from the business in 1962. In addition to his theatrical roots, Samuel Colt was the great-nephew and namesake of the founder of the Colt Firearms Company. We now move on to visit one of Hollywood's early scream queens. To find her, follow the long corridor until you reach the room with the window depicting Our Lady of Ransom. You've probably never heard the name of actress Mary Philbin, but she was behind one of the most iconic and terrifying reveals in motion picture history. Mary was born in Chicago in 1902 and moved to Hollywood at age 17 after winning a beauty contest. Throughout the 1920s, she appeared in a string of films produced by Universal. Among her most memorable pictures was 1928's The Man Who Laughs, starring Conrad Veidt. In it, she plays a young blind girl who falls in love with a kind-hearted man whose face was disfigured so that it displays a permanent grin. The film's protagonist is notable for being the inspiration for the appearance of comic book villain, the Joker. But her most famous screen role was as ingenue Christine Daae in 1925's The Phantom of the Opera. And it is she who reveals for the world the face of Lon Chaney's Phantom that after 9 decades is still the stuff of nightmares. Soon after the arrival of the talkies, Mary withdrew from the limelight and lived out the rest of her long life in seclusion. One of her last public appearances was at the Los Angeles premiere of Andrew Lloyd Webber's The Phantom of the Opera. There are many hallways and passages in Calvary's great mausoleum, and many of them look the same. But if you pay close attention, they point you where you want to go. When you see a private tomb with a window dedicated to Our Lady of Peace, look for the name Vivian Foy. Her stage name was Vivian Edwards, and she made dozens of shorts for Keystone Comedies in the 19-teens, and was a frequent co-star of Charlie Chaplin. She quit acting in 1918, and from 1926 until her untimely death at 53, she was married to Brian Foy, who rests within the unmarked crypt above his wife. Brian's show business career began in vaudeville at an early age. He was the eldest of the so-called 7 little Foys, whose father was Eddie Foy Sr. Brian left the act in 1917 to serve his country during World War I. After the war, he moved into motion pictures as a producer and director. He was known as the King of the Bees for his quickly and inexpensively made films that often came with sensational titles like Women's Prison, Dollface, House of Women, I Was a Communist for the FBI, and, well, you get the idea. Brian also had some hits like the horror classic The House of Wax, starring Vincent Price and Phyllis Kirk in spectacular 3D. And his last film was 1963's PT-109, about President John F. Kennedy's wartime exploits. Brian Foy passed away on April 20th, 1977. Although there are many more lives to explore here, the time has come for us to leave this part of the mausoleum. On our way up to the chapel, we pass by corridors ablaze with sunlight that streams through leaded stained glass windows. Their beauty calls out to us, but we admire them from afar as we press on to our next visit. As we near the chapel, we notice details in the architecture that we overlooked before, such as the ram's heads on the stair railings, and the ironwork in many of the private tombs, or the window that depicts the raising of Lazarus, and another the resurrection of Jesus. Finally, we arrive at the crypt of a true pioneer of American cinema, whose achievements and legacy have been shaped by events beyond her control. From the very beginning, Mabel Normand seemed destined for stardom. When she debuted in films in 1910, she didn't have any theatrical training, but she had a strong screen presence and a natural sense of timing. And it caught the attention of D.W. Griffith, who went on to direct her in a series of shorts from 1911 to 1912 that were produced by the Biograph Company in New York. While at Biograph, she met actor and director Max Sennett. When he moved to California to found Keystone Studios, Mabel followed and took on the role as his muse and collaborator. In its heyday, Keystone churned out 12 slapstick adventures per month and launched the careers of many comedy legends, including Normand. Among her many co-stars was Max Sennett himself, with whom she was involved in a rocky love affair. She also made a successful series of comedies with Roscoe Fatty Arbuckle. Another of her frequent co-stars in those days was a young English comic who came to America with a touring troupe of vaudevillians. In Mabel at the Wheel, Charlie Chaplin steals Normand away from her beau to go on a pleasant motorcycle ride. Charlie Chaplin's Little Tramp was born at Keystone Studios, and the character's first film was alongside Normand in Mabel's Strange Predicament, released in 1914. Normand would be Charlie's leading lady in a dozen short films over the next year. One of her greatest abilities was to recognize the brilliance in others, and she gave Chaplin the room he needed to perfect the role that would become a cinematic icon. They also appeared in the first feature-length comedy, Tilly's Punctured Romance, that starred the versatile and always amazing Marie Dressler. Throughout her time at Keystone, Mabel's talents were also utilized behind the camera. She wrote and directed many of her own films, and for a short while operated the ill-fated Mabel Normand Feature Film Company before signing a contract with Samuel Goldwyn. By the 1920s, her legacy as a pioneering filmmaker was already cemented, but the new decade brought with it scandal and speculation about her private life. The trouble began in 1921 when Mabel's friend and former co-star Roscoe Fatty Arbuckle was charged in the death of actress Virginia Rapet. The public outcry over the allegations led to the ban of all Arbuckle films, including those he made with Mabel. After 3 highly publicized trials, 2 ending in mistrials, Arbuckle was acquitted, but his career never recovered. Another, more personal event for Mabel took place on the night of February 1st, 1922. After an evening of conversation and gin cocktails, she left the bungalow of William Desmond Taylor, unaware that she would be the last person to see him alive. The next morning, the director was found dead, having been shot in the back. Although she was never a suspect, a distraught Normand was questioned for hours by the Los Angeles Police Department. It wasn't long before rumors began to circulate that Normand had a cocaine addiction, and it was alleged that when Taylor stepped in to help, he was murdered by drug dealers before he could turn them over to the police. Although there were other suspects, ranging from a former co-star to an obsessed starlet, and even the butler, no one was ever charged, and the murder of William Desmond Taylor remains unsolved. Normand's name was dragged into the press again in 1924 when her chauffeur was arrested for the non-fatal shooting of a businessman. Then in 1926, she married former co-star Lou Cody during what was rumored to be a drunken party. The fact that the couple lived in separate Beverly Hills homes only added weight to the story. Though flagging, Mabel's film career continued until ill health forced her to retire from movies in 1927. For most of her life, she suffered from tuberculosis, but a recurrence of the disease in the late 20s forced her into the Pottinger Sanatorium in Monrovia, California. And it was there on February 23, 1930, that she died at the age of 37. Funeral services were held on February 28 at the All Souls Chapel in Calvary Cemetery. Although it was supposed to be a private ceremony, hundreds of gawking fans showed up to see the many Hollywood greats who attended. They had come not only to say goodbye to a dear and loyal friend, but to an innovator who helped advance a new art form. Resting beside Mabel Normand is John Hodiak, whose rugged good looks and strong persona came to represent the common working man. He got his start in show business working in radio and playing bit roles in movies. His big break came in 1944 when Alfred Hitchcock cast him in Lifeboat as the love interest of Tallulah Bankhead. Because of a serious medical condition, John was unable to serve in the armed forces during World War II, and it was during that time he played some of his biggest parts that would have normally gone to A-listers like Clark Gable and Tyrone Power. But Hodiak showed great prowess as an actor and extended his range to the theater, where he earned acclaim in the part of Lieutenant Stephen Merrick in the Caine Mutiny court-martial opposite Henry Fonda. Tragically, his life was cut short by a heart attack at the age of 41, but his contributions to his craft live on. Irene Dunne was discovered by Hollywood while playing the part of Magnolia in Oscar Hammerstein II's Showboat. It would propel her into a long and successful career on both stage and in motion pictures. She reprised the role of Magnolia on the big screen in 1936. Some of her best remembered movies are those she made with Cary Grant. Though unquestionably a star, Irene was never taken in by stardom. Years after leaving show business, she said, "I drifted into acting and drifted out. Acting is not everything, living is." And she meant every word. As a devout Catholic, Irene was involved in numerous charitable causes. Both she and her husband were members of the Order of the Knights of Malta, and in that tradition, she raised over $20 million for St. John's Hospital. Irene Dunne has been described as the best actress to never win an Academy Award. But for a woman of faith who believed that the only treasure that matters is what's stored in heaven, she was happy just to be of service. For most who come here, the glitz and glamour of Hollywood is all a mirage on a barren and unforgiving desert that is littered with countless broken dreams and broken hearts. Hidden deep within the narrow passages of Calvary's great mausoleum is the grave of one who tasted from the cup of fame, only to have it slip from her fingers. By all accounts, 19-year-old Peggy O'Neill was on her way to great things. Born Barbara Jean O'Neill, she came to Hollywood from San Francisco and quickly found modeling work and played small parts in a few B-movies. In 1944, she appeared with Jane Powell in Song of the Open Road. By then, she was already in a tense relationship with 30-year-old screenwriter Albert Mannheimer, Jr. Over the next year, she went on a victory bond tour of Texas and the Southwest. Upon her return to Hollywood, a contract with Paramount Studios was waiting for her. But a serious quarrel with Mannheimer on the eve of the day she was to sign ended all that. The next day, Peggy O'Neill was found dead. In her hand was an empty bottle of Seconal. As the 21-year-old was laid to rest, the machinery that drives Hollywood never paused to consider what might have been. Our tour of Calvary Cemetery's great mausoleum is at its end. I want to thank everyone who walked with me this far. I hope you found your time was well spent. Together we visited oil magnates and movie stars and heard their stories. However, our exploration of this historic cemetery is far from complete. To do that, we must step into the sunlight and walk among the headstones, but we will save that for a future date. To get updates and extras on my channel, you can follow me on Facebook by clicking the link in the description below. And if you haven't already, please subscribe now for more grave explorations.